Mr. Walker. Mr. Clark.
Here.
Mr. Erkins.
All right, we did put out an amended agenda earlier today. You all have the amended agenda in front of you. But since it was less than 24 hours, we do need to vote to accept the amended agenda.
I move we accept the amended agenda.
Do I have a second? All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Amended agenda is approved. Okay, entertain a motion to approve the minutes of July 20th meeting.
So moved.
Second.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Approval of the minutes, and I'll go ahead and sign these and send these around. On to the monthly activity and financial reports, Pat and Anne Marie.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the board. Just a quick update on the Delta variant and some of the impacts that we're seeing, at least initially. We've already had one group, it was a short-term booking. They booked 2 weeks ago, last week, some of the Delta variant information was coming out. They chose to cancel, of which we said we understand. We're starting to, after Festival of Trees canceled, there were some other inquiries from some local groups about, is that a message? And it's like, no, it's, healthcare systems have particular evaluations that they're doing right now, which is, pretty high, very high expectations about numbers. And so we have a group in October that currently has a number of European, some Asian, Australian attendees. And so they rolled over from last year and they may need to consider moving again. So we're not sure exactly how the fall is going to roll out with the bigger groups who have a national presence and in some cases an international presence. So right now we're continuing to forecast a very strong fourth quarter, record fourth quarter. November is certainly going to be impacted by the loss of Festival of Trees. That's a major impact to occupancy, to square footage demand, and that sort of thing. So and food and beverage, quite frankly. So that's when Anne Marie and I get to it, you'll see a little bit of a dip in November there, deeper than we had forecasted before. But I just want to touch bases that we're continuing to follow recommendations by CDC. We absolutely follow the recommendations or the requests of our guests. Idaho Healthcare Foundation was in about 3 weeks ago. We had awful protocols in place. We had the thermal imaging camera. Everyone was in masks, gloves, and we respected all of their wishes, as we are with any group coming in. So there are a couple of other groups that are on the fence now because if they want to go to physical distancing, we simply won't have the space. So I just want to make the board aware of those are some of the high level potential impacts. So most of the state type and local organizations are choosing to maintain their dates. And again, right now we're honoring the client request. So we'll keep you posted, but obviously it could have a bit of an impact on us this fall. Some of the activities, we've started the RFP review for an aquatics project. Had a meeting today. The process is underway.
Madam Chair, and I've got a question for you.
Sure.
Why are you doing the RFPs?
I'm not in charge of the RFP process. I'm simply a participant of the process. At the recommendation of our council, thought it was a good idea to certainly be at the table since we are landowners as well as providing some.
No, I understand, but once we get involved in an RFP, doesn't it seem like it becomes ours?
Mike, I'd probably ask for a little better definition.
Chair, Pat, hi, Madam Chair. we, again, we are treating the process as if it is a public RFP process. However, it's being managed by ICA, and ICA will be the party that enters into the contract with the general or the construction manager that they will be hiring. But it is nonetheless, we are following all the public guidelines in terms of publications, et cetera, timelines. And so we're effectively part of the 3 or 4 person review team for the RFPs, but not technically, practically, legally, the ICA is going to be the party that's going to enter into the contract with whoever's selected.
You don't see any problems with this?
No, we've done it for 4 or 5 or more clients. I made my partner who does our construction bidding stuff bless the process to make certain we were doing the right things. In fact, we exchanged some emails today just to make certain we're on the right tracks.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Obviously, the budget review process has begun. Anne Marie and I will address that later in the meeting, very high level about where we're coming from. And again, you'll hear a little bit more about the potential impacts of variance as we get into that. We're going to need some help from the board on some guidance. Several large events actually have happened in July and August. So as I've repeated several times in the last few months, how appreciative we all are of your, as the board, support for making sure that the team was in place when we needed them to start moving forward. We're back up over 120-ish employees again. We're anxiously awaiting the higher level of return of BSU students, as we definitely are going to need more going into fall based on at least that which is on the books now. But as I mentioned, we had Idaho Healthcare Convention in, the Idaho State Bar exams are back. We will have had by the end of this month 4 weddings, which again, that we traditionally have not been a big wedding type venue, but certainly welcome them. One was for 400 people, and you'll see some pictures of it actually. Boise Fire Department had their awards and promotion presentation here a couple of weeks ago. The Idaho Association of School Administrators, who were here last August, and they had about 200 people. With all the distancing and everything, they had like 550 people this year, with about 100 more than they actually had really anticipated. So everybody couldn't wait to get back, and that particular meeting last week went exceptionally well. We've got the Albertson Open. It's a cater out next Tuesday for over 700 up at the golf course. We got Jaden DeLuca Foundation in for over 600 in the end of August. And we got Western Power Sports coming in next week with more than 300 people. So again, while I maybe preface the start of the meeting with the Delta variance impacts, I can tell you that the groups that we've had in, and then we had the FAM familiarization trip a couple of weeks ago. They know a couple of the board members attended that went exceptionally well, and we actually booked 3 pieces of business from that as a result. So the folks that are coming in droves, and they are excited to be here. And I can tell you without exception that so far anyway, the service levels have been exactly where they were before pre-COVID. So I would hope that the board takes pride in that the results of our efforts are paying dividends. Cody and I just got, and Allie just got back from Atlanta. We were there last week for the IAEM Venue Connect. There were 800 attendees. We were at the Omni and for lodging, and then we were at the Georgia World Congress Convention Center. And I can tell you that we have a higher attention to detail on cleanliness here than several other places around the country. The stories that we were hearing from several facilities that they're just trying to get staff rebuilt. There's a couple up in the Northwest in Washington who they don't have any staff. And so they're trying to figure out, they were open now, at least they were. I'm not sure where the governors are today on Washington, Oregon, but Anyway, the conference was a very good conference overall. There were mask mandates during the meeting. We had to get tested every morning. You had to take a little survey and show that you were confirmed, and then you got your wristband for the day. They use different colors every day. Masks were required during the conferences. The mayor had implemented a mask mandate for businesses, but not for guests or of those facilities. And it was kind of interesting hit and miss around town and about who was wearing them and who weren't. But again, conference was a solid conference. But again, we were very proud of representing Boise Center and certainly where we are compared to so many other facilities across the country. This is the wedding I was talking about. It was a couple of weeks ago, and the transformation of our ballroom and the capabilities of our team, I think, is what I'm trying to showcase here. Now, obviously, there were some additions by the client as to chair covers and some other things that they certainly provided. But the transformation of the ballroom for this, there was about 400 attendees. And again, it's just fun to show you all the capabilities of the facility that we have and the team that operates it, and the creativity, quite frankly. In fact, Cody and I are already being approached for that drape that's being hung that you see to invest in some. So arms are being twisted by our event staff that we do that. The Rose Awards are coming up September 7th, sponsored by the Convention and Visitors Bureau. We have 3 people who were nominated for different awards this year. Heather Oliphant was selected for or she is in the running for Manager of the Year. She was one of 3 finalists. Shira Hotvet from a facilities side is one of 3 finalists. But one of the most important is recognizing Chris Lochner for the Spirit of Hospitality Award. It's one that is chosen, and once you're chosen, you're in. So that's why we got Chris, or we were able to recognize Chris a couple of weeks ago. Kathy Pigeon was the first recipient. I was the second recipient. John Cunningham received it last year. So barring me, it's a pretty great group to be a part of. And we've been giving Chris a hard time for 20 years about being Mr. Downtown, but he is certainly deserving of that. So the visitor center stats, we can continue to see high numbers of visitors. Partly it was due to timing of several, you see Idaho is number 2 to California last month. So we had lots of events. There were several baseball tournaments or pickleball tournaments and that sort of thing. So there were a lot of Idaho related activities that helped drive that. But again, just the fact that we have international visitors again, I think is pretty exciting too. So as we look at the financials, the numbers are looking good. We did transfer 500 to the center for the month. The tax receipts at 765,000 with cash balances at 244,000. So financially, we were on the right track for sure. The net cash position, we did add the aquatics facility estimate in there. Again, just noting, as I have every month, the additional capital needs are actually $6 million over the next 3 years estimated. So again, as we get into budget season, I've been trying to make sure the board is aware that we have major projects, particularly in East, that are needing to be done now. They're in that cycle now. So again, just more information on that. We have the stabilization fund, but again, in the budget, we don't have those earmarked, but certainly in the action we do. So the numbers with between the 6 million for the capital needs and the 5 million for the aquatics facility, 11, that's still, 16 million that in cash. So Occupancy and ADR, the hotel occupancy for the month improved by 1,150 basis points, 85.5%, up obviously 57% over prior year, but 103% of 2019 levels. We're in June, we had, and again, the way the receipts work, we're a month behind. So for actual June, the way the state reports it, for July, it was actually June receipts. So for the first time ever, we hit $1 million in room tax, ever. The average rate, I actually reached out to several hotel friends, making sure that there was no dissemination of individual property numbers. I wasn't looking for how each property was doing, but when I sent out the Star Report numbers of the average rate, and the room demand was up over 2019 by a couple thousand rooms, but it was the average rate that it was $20 million in total hotel room revenue. So I took those numbers, sent them out to my friends, and I just said, hey, not looking for anything individual, but is this right? And they said, yeah. And so then when we got the state tax receipts back, it confirmed that we had a record month ever, and that's coming off of a pandemic.
That was the Far West soccer tournament.
Well, it was a combination of things. So yes, absolutely. Far West plays a major role in that. Absolutely. But again, in June, I was never aware that pickleball was as popular as it is, but there were a number of pickleball tournaments in Boise. Nick Shoba, our facility manager, his son plays baseball at the high school level, and there were tournaments every single weekend during June and actually July. There were apparently some softball tournaments. I heard about to another friend of mine who has a daughter who plays softball. So lots of sporting events. We had 3 conventions, and all 3 conventions, I mean, they're the ones that there were state conventions that pretty much always happen in June traditionally, and their numbers were all up to 2019. So again, it reflects the anxiousness, at least of the statewide organizations, to get together. So it was definitely a combination of factors. And I was told that by a couple of folks that in June, rooms were renting at $400 a night here, which again, I have no idea, were they suites, were they, but demand was that high. So, I mean, Carrie and I are both anxious about July numbers, the Star Report, and I can't get that until next week. It's like the 19th or 20th of the month.
Madam Chair, if reading ahead a little bit, I think we are at our share of room revenues exceeding our total for last year.
I think we did that last month.
Correct.
The last month we were at 5.5. Last year, 2020 was 5.5, and we're at 4.5.
Thank you.
So we're close.
If we make $1 million next month, we will be.
So again, the leisure demand continues to be very, very strong. But again, the good news for us is that we're also seeing the conventions, and more of an assumption than I'm able to track. But again, the weddings being as large, particularly as large as they are, and I believe the family a couple of weeks ago was from Hagerman area. So you got to imagine a lot of those people stayed in hotels. So again, I'm excited. We've got this big push, and then you've got the Delta variant and whatever other variants may cause us some issues. So that's the balancing act we're trying to do. The demand and revenues, again, the highest level prior to 2009, and again, basically, it's the highest that we had in June. So demand and record ADR. And again, as we talked about, Far West and pickleball tournaments resulted in some of the highest room night generation that we've ever had. So. We continue to get several inquiries about the future. Not sure, Ally and I haven't had a chance to really talk about, any latest impacts on, again, recent COVID variant impact on 22 or beyond much, but nothing negative to report at this time. It's, again, people continue to look at Boise as a great destination. As I mentioned, the FAM had 12 meeting planners. There was one person who pretty much booked at the table that night. From what I understand, I was out of town, so I wasn't able to attend the dinner. And then there was another group that Kay went to meet for breakfast, I think the following day. And then there's a third party, there's a third group who is pretty much close to booking or signing. So again, I think the CVB did a great job in determining who the attendees should be from all those people who were interested in coming. I think we're starting to show some really strong growth in 23 for sure and 24. So again, barring unforeseen circumstances, 22 is slated to be probably a record year, and 23 has that potential that's already shaping up. So these are a couple of photos from the FAM that the event and food and beverage team wanted to share. Don't know if Jody or Chase have any comments on the event. My team said it went well, and that everybody seemed to have a good time. So I don't know if there's any other feedback from you all. That
it went great. They seemed to enjoy it and have a good time. Everybody went out afterwards and they all talked amongst each other, and I didn't hear anything negative about the city or the FAM.
Nice meeting Chase's wife. She knows more about this business than I'll know when I'm done.
She's certainly been around it for a long time. Again, confirmed conventions, we're off to a great start for 23 and 24. 22, all of a sudden, I think people are going to start taking another look based on variance. But right now, we haven't had any pullback on 22. With that, I will turn it over to Anne Marie.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair and Directors. The Boise Center is holding strong on the variance. Our revenues are under budget. We've managed to control expenses, which has allowed it, kept that variance at $98,000 of expenses over revenue and expenses under budget. The district is $2 million over budget, and that's due to the tax revenues. I was talking to Chase earlier this afternoon and explaining to him at the time we went into budget last year, we were just coming off April, which was $125,000 in tax revenues. So we came in with a totally different perspective and would never have expected that we would have a record tax revenue after a pandemic. But so anyway, so the positive variance in the district continues to carry and results in a combined variance of 2.1 million in our favor.
No, Madam Chair, one quick question.
Yes.
Why in your column 21 over 20, we're showing a negative for revenues? Where are we spending that 5460?
Our revenues last year combined were 6.5 million. And right today, for the end of July, they were 5.5. Because we had, if you remember, we had a record first quarter last year.
Okay.
And so that, and then it dropped.
Let me ask you my standard question.
Yes,
How much do we got?
about 19 million.
Okay.
But we have, so the first slide, when we talk about it and the goals that Pat went over, where we talk about how we have the money, but then we also have the stabilization fund, and then we have the commitment for the aquatic center, and we have the commitment, the $6 million in extra capital that we'll need over the next 3 years, which I believe came down to the bottom of about 4.5, right?
Thanks.
You're welcome.
Thank-
So this slide, again, tax revenues exceeded anything more than we could have imagined. It was 114% over 2019 and $655,000 over budget. I drew the line across there so you could see kind of where we're ending, or the year is at right now. And if you look, we're about the same as 2000. We hit 2013 revenues. And if you look at the, we're 3 months ahead of last year. If you look at the stack, right? So if you compare the orange to the orange, you can see we've got the blue and the yellow. So we're ahead of last year at the same time by almost 2 months. If that makes sense.
If you look back to 2007, prior to the recession of 2008, 2007 to that point had been the record year. So that 4.4 million was the highest tax revenue year ever to 2009. Then we hit the recession and the economy took off.
And in
So
16,
that's sort of that point of reference there.
and in 16, we added Boise Center East. Financial highlights for the Boise Center. We, July was actually a good month for us. We had events were still picking up. We were at 17 events, which was up from 4 in the prior month and up from 5 last year. Our event days had increased by 19%. Our day visits were up. Our utilization had increased. Revenue was up. AV continues to help generate, but we had some strong food and, yeah, use the word strong lightly, but some good food and beverage. Our gross profits in line with budget, and our EBITDA loss is 51,000 less than budget, and our net loss was less than budget by 100,000. So, given this situation and the circumstances, a decent month. Year to date, again, AV revenues over budget. Our gross profit loss is over budget, and that's due to our lower revenues combined with some of the fixed costs due to the retention of staff, which, as Pat has indicated, thanks to the board, we're able to operate compared to a lot of the other convention centers that can't at this point because they don't have the staff available, and we'll continue to provide excellent service. The SG&A expenses are controlled. They're 634,000 under budget, which is been what has allowed us to stay close to budget. The total. The square foot utilization by month. You can see that black is this year, the yellow is last year. So July, we were up compared to last year. And you can see the black lines continuing to increase again. This was as of last week or earlier this week when I ran the report, we've had some changes in movement. So would expect that October and November next month will show some downward trend. Operating revenues. Like I said, good month comparatively to last year. We were at the second highest level since March of 2020. You can see again, the yellow line is the forecast, and we were going into the forecast with pretty good August, September, and October, and the drop in November is due to the festival of trees. But the forecast is holding stable right now at about 3.3 million. Depending on what's going on with the COVID, we may see a drop in that next month. So this is the next, the big question is, the budget discussion, trying to determine what do we budget for revenues. Even when we built this, or I put this slide together earlier this week, we didn't have the COVID issue as much even in the last couple of days, but we're looking for some direction from you on where you would like, what is everybody's crystal ball or what's everybody's perception? And I'd really just like to open it up to a discussion, because you can look at the district tax today and say our our July collections for June were at a record level, but do we think that's gonna continue? And how do you, what do we just? Excuse me. Do we project an increase over this year by a certain percentage or, and then again with the Boise Center, it's the same way. When we look at our forecast right now was at 5.3 million with no COVID impact. And we book 50% of our revenue in the year for the year. So if you double that, that means it could be a $10.6 million year, which would just blow our socks off. I'm not recommending that that's where we're at, but are we, if we're gonna be this year at 3.2 million, do we wanna do an increase? I'm looking for help and I think Pat is too, and chime in here, Pat.
Yeah, I'll jump in. Pretty much all of you except Chase have been through some budget cycles with me and you know that I tend to budget conservatively. I want to make sure that we hit our revenue goals and exceed our expense goals, i.e. come in well under our expense lines. There are so many unknown variables going into next year. There's the Delta variant now, but being a virus, there's going to be other variants. Now, to what extent will that impact the economy? And, right now, if the most restrictive measures are masks mandates, we can continue to operate without issue. And I think there will still be a pretty good travel pattern. If things stabilize and opens up again, and particularly Europe, Asia, and Australia can get back into some normalcy of travel. Again, that impacts us because we do have, and I've shared this with the board before, we have a lot of groups that have some international presence to it. My suggestion is that we budget to the forecast that we have, which is potentially to be an $8 million year next year, which would be, again, a record breaker for Boise Center. But the pent-up demand and a lot of the pre-book, particularly the conventions next July 2022, we've got something going every week. It's been a very, very long time to have a July like that. But I'm saying that with the caveat to the board that, hopefully we've earned the trust that if we see something starting to go sideways, we're going to manage accordingly. So we're prepared to give a budget as we would on any normal year based on what we see on the books. As long as the board is prepared and understand that we'll manage to the deviation in business trends should they occur to the level possible. Or again, the other option is to provide a budget with some consideration of uncertainty, which would lower that revenue and obviously would lower the expenses proportionately, at least on the variable expenses for sure. So I've never come to the board with this kind of a discussion before. Normally we've been able to come to the board and say, here it is. But in this one, again, being public officials, and certainly as the reports are out, when we do our monthly reports, as we do now, we are responding to the business demands currently and deviation within market demand. So we're doing it now. We've been working on the budget. We've got a lot of preliminary numbers already in there. But before we start, finalizing that, again, I just looking to you all to get a pulse. Certainly we'll be meeting with the finance committee, hopefully in the next, 2-3 weeks. We want to be prepared with the appropriate approach.
Madam Chair. So Pat, when we built that reserve budget of 6 million, it was before there was a pandemic. We said, if the sky falls and we have a reduction in our tax revenues of, I think at the time we imagined say 30% worst case scenario, and then let's build a buffer in there so that we can service our debt, keep the lights on, keep the facility operational for as long as possible. And I mean, that's a pretty good buffer, that $6 million that sits there. Knowing we have that safety net, it's my preference that we budget based on forecast rather than artificially be too conservative, even knowing that things could change around again. So that's my opinion, is we budget towards the forecast that we have now.
Agreed.
Well, Madam Chair, I'm normally bullish, but I'm not bullish on this upcoming budget by any means. I think everything I read nationally and internationally says it's going to be a tough fall. How many budgets do you do? Do you just do the one or do you sensitize it?
We do the one. I mean, it's not hard. I mean, we have the tools and it wouldn't be hard to do multiple, do another one and change revenues. We have it set up so it works. The variable
Yeah.
fluctuates with the
I
variable.
mean, I think along what Director Walker is talking about, we basically have our fixed costs covered with our stabilization fund. So, and I'm looking at Cody, and the big numbers are the variable costs, which
Well,
by
the big,
definition should be easier to manage.
our big number, yes, but the big numbers too are like, you have 1.7 for your lease payment and your capital, which is at least $1 million to maintain the facility. And then the remainder of the 6, so then the other 4 million, right? Or other 3 million you're operating.
But I think to your point, Jody, I think if I'm hearing correctly, I mean, labor is that biggest variable cost and certainly your inventories. So to that point, absolutely, that's the biggest, I mean, that's the easiest to manage. I mean, if you're not doing the business, you're not having the inventory and you're certainly not having the staff, as reflective of all the months of COVID. So what we can do is take maybe not as an aggressive, maybe a little conservative, but not ultra conservative as we go in. So, if I was saying 8 million, maybe we come in at 7 and manage to that. I mean, is that reasonable? Is that, Jim? I mean, again, the forecast right now is pushing, I mean, again, it's full transparency. I mean, we're dancing on $8 million, which never really, 2020 would have done that, and that's, so we're prepared to go to the table with that and then manage appropriately if things don't materialize. To Jody's point, if the fall pulls back as much as some folks are hearing, and we even heard it at our own conference, there are certain regions around the country that I think will continue to do well, which will be us, but we're still going to be impacted by that national travel, which is the biggest detriment to us. Or sorry, it's the biggest threat to us, not detriment, but the biggest threat to us.
Are there any capital projects in the budget that would be immovable?
Well, in fact, I guess I'm not prepared to talk about that. She might be able to speak to it more directly today, but we've already, I think we have a 250-ish thousand that we haven't spent, that we
In
actually.
this year's budget.
Yeah, at the board's request last year, when you all said, we'll approve it, but either hold to the very last quarter or don't spend it. And that's exactly what we've done. And so I'm thinking we've got about $250,000 there that at least right now, we're not prepared to spend. I mean, we're not going to spend it. So there are some specific projects regarding particularly carpet in East. I mean, and at some point, we're always happy to walk people through. So there are some projects, yes, I don't have all of them, but there are a few for sure that are in the interest of preserving the quality of the facilities we will need to do. And then, as we always do, the variable projects, we don't need it, we're not spending it. And I think we've done a really good job with that.
And the start date is December 1st?
Yes.
Okay, so we have a little bit of time to see how the fall goes. I mean, I know you set the budget earlier, but
Our last chance to approve a budget is October because we have to have the lease renewal done.
Is there anything on the books next year that is medical related or coming from California, Oregon, Washington? That since they're more strict on kind of the lockdowns and travel stuff, that we could maybe take into account and weight them differently on the percentage that might actually go forward?
Have we done much of that, Ally, yet?
We haven't really analyzed it from that angle specifically, but it would be, but we could sort things and look at that.
The system can sort pretty easy. So, yes, we'll take a look at that. Absolutely.
One of the things, Chase, that always presents a little challenge for us is about 50% of the events book in the year for the year. So we're coming into forecast, right? And we're looking and like right now, I think I said, we have non-conventions is 2.7 million. And so if you add 100% in the year for the year, you'd be at 5.4. But otherwise, right now, we're at 5.3. So if you say 5.3 and we're gonna double that, you're at 10.6. And that's a big variant, right? And that's the biggest challenge when is that we're forecasting for events that aren't even on the books yet.
and those are typically local.
Correct.
Yes.
So
Although we
any-
have picked up some conventions
conventions,
this year too that we hadn't anticipated.
True.
So less likely to have an issue with those if they were
But
in
if,
that year.
but I think Chase brought up a good point to a good analysis of particularly the coastal states and medical, obviously with the Kansas City Shared Festival, and well, any of the hospital organizations this year, Kid for a Night Festival. In fact, I believe they've even canceled the Christmas parties. So it's an easy analysis. So we will move
Hybrid.
forward with a budget that's reasonable, and then meet with the the finance committee and have you take a look at it. And then obviously, again, the goal is to make sure that we have the budget for you in October for approval so that we can get it to the trustee.
And just from my perspective, from what I'm seeing is that I have a couple clients who are choosing to move forward, kind of taking a more bullish approach to say, we're gonna have our conference in October, we're gonna move forward and adjust as we go. But, and also the response that I'm seeing from attendees is that they wanna meet. Some of the comments are, please God, don't cancel this again. So I know that that's what I'm seeing is that, I think people that are wanting to meet are taking the precautions necessary, getting vaccinated, doing masking, taking into account other protocol on site to where the hope is that we still continue to move forward. So I guess that's where I'm skewing a little more optimistic. I'm hopeful that the numbers stay up.
I did meet with Bob Batista, who manages Expo Idaho, the other day, and had a good discussion. They have, in 2019, they pre-sold 30,000 tickets for the fair. And I believe that was like period to date. They're at 90 this time. So in the discussions, like, well, do you think that your lines at the ticket sales are going to be down? Or, or people are just so used to doing stuff online now. And he said, it doesn't matter, they're coming. And, they're moving forward with fair as it always is. He said, there's been a few vendors that they can't find employees or they can't find merchandise. So that they can't have their booth. But he said for the most part, food vendors are out there. Most of the tents, the marketing or the stuff you can buy are there. And he said, if people aren't comfortable, they aren't going to come. the Idaho Association of School Administrators last week. They, again, more numbers than that they'd had before, and they all showed up. They all had a great time. And so, again, the fair is moving forward without issues. Tree Fort, I think everybody saw some of the restrictions now that Tree Fort's put in, but they're moving forward. And we're actually, Boise Center is actually a part of Tree Fort this year. Allie's worked out an agreement with them, and they're having some events here, and then same thing for when they have it again next year. So I think there's going to be an adaptability, and I think some of it's going to depend on local regulations and mandates. But the mandate word hasn't been used yet, so we'll see what happens.
Madam Chair, Pat, Tree Fort is going to require people to show they're vaccinated or at least have a test, have the test done before they're sold tickets and allowed into the concert. So I've got two questions. One, do we ever follow up with any of the groups that come in here to see if there's any spread of COVID of them? And two, have you thought, or are we thinking about putting any kind of restrictions ourselves, like a COVID test or vaccination, before you allow people to come in? Or three parts, are any of the groups thinking about doing that before they invite anyone?
I think some of the groups might be, but we haven't been informed. Like I said, we work with every group to whatever level that they want. But if they are requiring it, then it's their responsibility to provide the services to do that.
And so if I could follow up, so to High's point is that, are there any facilities that have some infrastructure in place that we currently don't have that make groups a little more comfortable with meeting? I don't know what that would be, but is there?
If I'm hearing your question correct. So for instance, this group that's booked for October, they wanted, to give their attendees a higher sense of security about or purpose about being here. They said, well, what do you have? And so we went back to our COVID protocols. Said, we can we have 3 thermal imaging cameras. We can put whatever, we can do mask gloves. We can do whatever you would like to see or whatever makes you comfortable. We talked about our HVAC system and the circulation or the expressing of the air out of the building and bringing in new air. The GBAC accreditation, making sure that they see all the protocols we have in place for GBAC. So yes, I mean, and that, quite frankly, we had a conference call over a couple of things they had questions about the other day. We did a Zoom call. And 2 guys were on the East Coast, and then there was a woman from Fort Collins. And so they said that was perfect. That really has helped them. And so even coming into the spring and summer, absolutely, those were all the things that made the groups feel comfortable. Idaho Healthcare, as I mentioned, that was here 3 weeks ago. I mean, they were very concerned about health protocols. So again, we provided everything that they needed and certainly met or exceeded the expectations. Hi, to another question you had about do we follow up? We don't directly, we always follow up with the client, but there's never been, to my knowledge, there's never been a client that said, hey, we had people get sick at the conference. And I think whether we ask that directly or not, it's pretty much implied that if they do, we're going to know about it. I mean, that's sort of a central district health issue that they want it now. And so they've asked the
reason I asked was because there were stories last week about some hot spots that were weddings. And since you mentioned a wedding with 400 people, I just wondered if there was any concern, if there was any fallout from that.
I can't answer that on behalf of the client because they had a great time and again, they determine the level of protocols for their people. Chris Lochner has had our service staff in masks pretty much the whole time, regardless, but I'm trying to think, you had a third part to your question though about, are we going, or do we have plans to go to limiting access? And the answer to that is not currently. We're doing the best we can to follow CDC guidelines and not extreme one way or the other. And again, because we have our own internal operations, we don't require, I mean, we have not required proof of vaccination. We haven't gone into those protocols. But again, for the clients coming into the building, that's why we leave it up to the client to decide what they want to do, because we can get to any level, but we don't require it at this time.
Thanks, Ben.
Can I ask a total non-legal question here? I just was wondering, Pat, do the room tax receipts, obviously not technical related to our operational revenues, but in general, I mean, if you assume, or if you're taking a conservative approach or a more aggressive approach on receipts, does that, on operational revenues, does that also flow over to our estimates on room tax receipts? Or how do the two marry each or follow each other, or do they at all?
Well, and right now, that's literally the $1 million question, because if you look, for instance, last fall, when there was a huge leisure push, and same thing with this spring, huge leisure push. We did a lousy job in being able to see that comment. I mean, we got ultra conservative and I mean, as Emery alluded to, our forecast for room tax revenues this year, we took a very conservative approach to it. We don't know, and based on the fall last year, it was pretty strong, but it's like, well, how long will that go on? The leisure market continued in November last year, and then we hit, the governor filed us back to stage 2, which caused all kinds of things. So the challenge looking forward, I mean, if you look at this past school year, which I think helped the leisure travel, is the parents and kids could travel. Parents were working remotely, the kids were working remotely. So they weren't tied down anywhere. And again, Idaho particularly was one of those considered safer states. And room tax revenues across states, maybe more than you wanted to hear. But the Idaho Travel Council put out some numbers where pretty much every region in Idaho but ours exceeded room tax revenues in 2020. Think about that for a second. So it shows how much our market depends on convention and business type travel, not necessarily leisure, but business travel, because traditionally our region exceeds every other region in revenue growth, in room tax revenue growth. And this is the 2%, this is the ITC 2%. Eastern Idaho, Northern Idaho, Northeastern Idaho, or the easternmost boundaries of Idaho, showed huge increases, and because everybody was driving. Yellowstone Park saw a record year last year. They saw a record July, I believe, this year. You got Glacier Park going to the north. So, long-winded answer your question, sorry, but it's not as easy sort of as it was in the past, where we had these metrics to go by that, well, we have these conventions, that sort of thing. So as we take a look at this year, I mean, the leisure market, again, the leisure travel from March on, I mean, if you look at the room tax comparisons, 2019, we were inching closer and closer. We were neck and neck in 2021, pushed mostly by leisure. We get into summer now, and June, I think, is a great example where you've got the leisure, you've got the conventions, and it just blew up. July, I think, again, you're gonna have leisure. So as we start taking a look at the impact, and to Chase's suggestion earlier, the group demand is gonna drive some of that philosophy for rent tax revenue. And we really haven't delved into it that much because of the craziness of it. But again, wanted to base some of it on discussions with the board and then get into it. So whereas in the past, I would say the rent tax collections always exceeded operational revenues. I don't know. Probably not the best answer to give the board today, but that's what we need to work through. And what we're facing is we're trying to put all this together. Fair question, but not as easy an answer as normal.
Any other comments or questions?
Madam Chair, I move we approve the executive director's report.
Second.
All those in favor?
Uh,
Any opposed? Okay, report's approved. On to other business. Henry, budget review. Do you wanna do that? Or did you already?
That was,
That was. it
that
part
was
of it.
what.
You don't have
yep.
anything additional?
No.
Okay. ICA, do we have an update?
Nick is here. Spend a couple of minutes.
Okay.
Thank you guys for having us here. Madam Chairman, thank you. Not a ton of updates. We are still waiting on the seller for the close of the land. It will happen sometime between this week and October 5th. October 5th is the final day of the extension. So sometime between now and then, we will close on the land. We received 3 RFP bids last week. They are being reviewed and discussed, and a decision is forthcoming. Mr. Rice, Ryan, and myself met with a couple of people last week via Zoom. Dee Pickett of Western Specialties here in Idaho, and Dave Bergquist of Sprung Structures based out of Canada in Salt Lake City, discussing the structure of the building. I'm sure if you guys would all like details of those, Mr. Rice can supply those to you guys at whatever time you'd like to, but they were very productive conversations. Both gentlemen seem to be very well invested in this project and looking to do it. Sprung Structures obviously has a little bit more experience with aquatic centers and pools, but that decision will come, I assume, when Mr. Rice and Ryan make that decision. I don't know whose final say that is, but.
Madam Chair, just one quick question.
Yes, sir.
You said the 3 RFPs have been reviewed. Do the dollar amounts match what you thought they would be? Or are they higher than your projection?
I think that for my projection, yes, I think they match. And I know that
How much is that?
Ryan and I have discussed with Mr. Rice,
No,
Yeah.
how much was your projection?
10.
10 million.
Yes.
And you asked us for 5.
Yes.
Are you gonna ask us for more?
No, sir.
Are you gonna raise it?
We have worked from day one under the assumption that anything over $5 million will be assumed as a burden of ICA.
Okay, you're gonna raise 5 million. You're not gonna come back to us and ask us for more money.
No, sir.
All right. I'll hold you to that.
Okay. Other than that, Ryan and myself will be doing a Zoom meeting with the USA House of Delegates, 3rd Sunday of September. This is where we bid on some other larger meets. We will be making a bid process. We are working with Andrew from CVB to put together a little bit of a presentation for some of these people. Hotel numbers, hotel locations, restaurants, stuff to go on around the area here. And those meets will be bid out 2023, 2024, and 2025. So there's a possibility that we could have a very busy July and August of 2023. extending into some of those other years.
That's what I was wondering, is when you feel comfortable getting some of these larger meets, and it sounds like not until 23.
23 is, everything is bid out usually 2 years in advance. Now, some of them will be depending on the Washington and Oregon situations. This past year, Ryan and I just came back from a swim meet in Dallas, Texas, that was supposed to happen in Gresham, Oregon. But their facility has been shut down since March of 2020. So people are looking all over. Last spring, we went to St. George, Utah, because the facility that was supposed to host a meet was Federal Way, King County Aquatic Center. That was closed down. In July, we were in Austin, Texas, because King County Aquatic Center was shut down. So some of these meets have been awarded to Gresham, Oregon and King County Aquatic Center in 2022 and early 2023, depending on how Oregon and Washington handle shutdowns or whatever else is coming here. Some of those meets may open, but we wouldn't expect any kind of bid on those too quick of a turn.
So 22 is going to be get your feet under you year. Open,
Yeah, I
get
mean,
your feet under you.
especially with scheduling of finalizing the project and finishing the project, it would be tough to turn it around for 2022.
And question about the land, what is the delay? Is it just on the seller side?
The seller asked for an extension. They are trying to do something that is called an exchange. Somebody who is probably much smarter at this table than I am can explain that, but
They're struggling to find a place to put their money so they don't have to pay taxes. So
Got it.
they've worked in extensions to keep trying to work it out.
1031.
I'm sorry, I didn't follow that.
There's a provision in the tax code that allows them to exchange from the land into
The
another
current owner?
property. Yeah, the seller. Yep. And because of the way the market is right now, it's hard to find a replacement property that fits whatever they're looking for. So they worked in extensions to try and buy them more time. Because once they close, a 45-day clock starts that they have to identify a property in. So they're trying to delay that until they find the right property and get it under contract.
Because ICA paid some money, right?
yes, sir.
Guarantee that this deal. will
Yes.
close. And so that date is moving,
The latest that date can move to is October 5th.
because
That is
That's what they negotiated out to in the
the
purchase
TSA
contract.
negotiation that was done
they
through the lawyers.
changed, right? No,
Not unless all the parties agree.
yeah,
Right. So if the sellers asked for another one and if buyers agreed to do that, then yeah. But that would be up to the buyers at this point, not the sellers.
right, but I mean, Idaho Aquatics is not interested in having to pay rent any time.
We're also not interested in extending this any longer than is sort of being extended.
Okay,
So
As we are seeing water space in the valley here is being gobbled up, and there are plenty of future clients and people who are depending on this facility to be built. We are not looking to extend.
that leads to my next question, Madam Chair. How's your fundraising going?
We are closing the gap. We have a small gap due to the inclusion of Murtha Pools, Murtha Pool is the pool builder who builds the Olympic pool and the Olympic trials pool, and they are the best in the world. And so if we were to go with the original option of Century Pools, which is what Ryan originally proposed, we can start that today. But we are trying to close the gap to get us to Murtha Pools, which is about a $1.5–2 million gap that is being closed because of the product. The product is just that much better.
There's a condition preceding in the contract for 2 million.
Yes,
You've got that covered.
yes.
And now we're at 3.5 or something, and you got to get to 5.
We get to that, yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
And so is there any indication from the seller that they would pull it after the October date, or are they looking to still try
I'm
to?
not sure that the seller can pull it after the October.
Well, I
15th.
mean, it's like, so if they get to the point and they decide, hey, we can't find a property
they'll be forced to pay taxes on the money that they get from the sale.
Okay,
Yeah, it's
a
my
bind.
understanding that
Got
they can't back out of the deal on
got
October
it.
fifth.
Okay. That's what I was,
Try, but then you sue for specific performance.
okay.
And Michael just writes himself another check.
I just find somebody smart in my office to figure it out.
Thank you.
Anything else? Any questions? Any other further questions? Thank you for the update. Okay, with that, on our amended agenda, we are going to go into executive session by roll call vote. Or I guess,
Madam Chair, I move that we go into executive session pursuant to Idaho Code 74-2061B to consider the evaluation of employee.
Second,
roll call vote.
Roll call vote pursuant to Idaho Code Section 74-2061B. Ms. Mucko,
Yes.
Mr. Olson,
Yes.
Mr. Walker,
Yes.
Mr. Claude,
yes.
Mr. Erkins.
Yes.
Okay. We're back from executive session. Jody?
Yeah, Madam Chair, if I might, during the executive session, as pointed out under the statute that we went into it under, was to discuss evaluation of an employee. There may be an issue. If there is, it may result in public inquiry. If that occurs, I'd like to move the board support the chair in responding in whatever way she sees appropriate.
Second,
All those in favor?
aye.
Right. Any opposed? All right.
Madam Chair, I move for adjournment.
Meeting is adjourned.
Thank
I
you.
second that.
We're just going